Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast. Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching. I'm Katie.
And I'm Elena.
And Elena, how are you doing? I'm so excited to hear an update. 2 weeks ago, we recorded our 100-mile recap episode and wondering how the body is feeling.
Yeah, good question, because I feel like I would have a different answer every 12 hours. Recovery is pretty non-linear, so I feel like I've had some good days and then quite a few where I'm like, is this going to ever get better? But I know it will. I would say the first week I was obviously pretty dead. I didn't do any running, but I also didn't feel like I was that sleepy dead. I wasn't sleeping all that much. Like I probably was actually getting between 6 and 8 hours a night, but never had a night where I was like, let me just sleep for 12 hours. And then coming into the second week, I was like, I want to try running again. And I had been walking a ton and on my feet a lot. And I was like, oh, this should feel fine. And it did not feel fine. my knees felt about 20 years older. And also that was on road. So probably not as helpful to be on a hard surface either. But just got back to actually doing some runs that feel pretty not, I wouldn't say normal entirely, but just like not painful in the last 2 days on trail, but thinking I'm going to start easing in a bit more. I'm not trying to push it though. If anything doesn't feel good, I just walk, like take my time. I'm not putting too much pressure on it. So I would say overall, like better than expected the first week in terms of just like moving around and feeling like a functional person, but then it's taking a little bit longer than maybe I originally thought to get back into like normal training. And that's also okay. I think one thing I miss is just the routine of running. So trying to make sure I still have reasons to get outside and get fresh air, because I think that's just beneficial for me as a person. I think some things that have been funny is that every time I go for a run, a new kind of ache or pain kind of just comes up. Maybe my body was like, well, we'll deal with the knees first. And once we deal with that, then I'll remind you that your hip flexor is sore. And then once we deal with that, I'll remind you that our calf is sore. And it's just like a progression of feeling little different things. I think that's the journey that my body is on, is just finding those different issues and getting back into the normal swing of things. And that's not something to be rushed. Because I mean, the worst thing would be to jump back into training, push through some of the pain that I was pushing through in the race, and then having it become much worse of a thing. So I'm not pushing it is the point.
I love that. And I think you are doing a really good job of taking it slow and just letting your body kind of guide how you're going to feel. Can I ask, what have you been doing from a recovery perspective, more than just like, taking walks? Are you doing like Epsom salts bath? Are you getting massages? Are you doing stretches, yoga? How do you incorporate those things?
Yeah, good question. Probably not as much specific stuff as I maybe should be doing. I did get a massage the first week out, and that felt amazing. I had this really weird tightness and soreness deep in my hips, and I felt like the massage was really, really good for starting to work some of that out. I think it just had a lot of tightness in my hips. Definitely Epsom salt baths though. I've been doing that probably every other day, and that's felt really good. Food, I feel like I've been just trying to eat whenever I'm hungry, and trying to eat also extra food before bed if I'm worried that I haven't gotten enough in, just to make sure that have enough fuel to start rebuilding, and having protein shakes. So that's been good. Yeah, other than that, I wouldn't say anything too specific. Just trying to do my best to like not push it, basically. So, yeah.
Yeah, super, super smart. And I guess my last question is, how do you feel about the race now, kind of looking back on it? How do you feel mentally? Like, do you have big takeaways that are different from 48 hours when we last recorded? I'm curious about your perspective.
Oh, that's a good question too. I'm not sure. I have takeaways that are very different than initially, other than recognizing 2 weeks out that was a big effort. I think in the moment I was like, I know that was a big effort. I'm going to take my time to feel better, but my body is seemingly okay. But I also think that having a 2 week out perspective as well, my sleep is still probably not entirely normal. My body obviously is not feeling like a normal runner. Like I did a hike yesterday or 2 days ago, I guess, that was steep, but nothing crazy. And my legs were really shaky. So I was like, man, I feel like I just took a lot out of me. And I think mentally too, it took a lot out of me, where I had felt, really, really hard to get back in the zone and feel, I think I was really struggling to focus for the first week or so. So yeah, I mean, nothing crazy from how the race went. I'm still just thrilled with the result and the fact that all the planning went well and everything in the race went pretty smoothly from, I guess, what I was hoping would happen. But recognizing like, I think I did push through a lot of pain, and my body has been reminding me that in some small ways. Like when I get a little niggle on my hip, I'm like, oh, I kind of remember like mile 50 or something when that was coming on. And then I was like, not right now. I don't need to pay attention to that right now. Like, it'll get better. And now it's like, okay, can you pay attention to me? Because we're still tired. So I think it's just like my body is keeping the score a little bit and it is letting me know. And listening to that in a smart way is, I think, my focus right now. But also trying to get back to a place where I'm training. I'm not like intensely, but just like enough in a stable way. So I've been biking and doing other things too. That like biking feels really good because it's low impact. And I still feel like I'm having adventures and getting outside. So like that's been a new focus, and yeah, just finding new ways to move while I let my body heal from running that hard.
Well, as always, you're doing such a good job of listening to your body. And I think we'll be excited to hear kind of where you're at 2 weeks from now. And hopefully soon you'll kind of reach that plateau of like, okay, I think I'm back to being my usual self. But it was a big effort. So really want to validate that that was super, super real. And if you missed it, go back, listen to the Canyons recap episode 29, I believe, with Elena. It's a really, really awesome one. With that, I think it makes sense maybe to transition to the rest of our coaching and training insights. That was actually a really big one on recovery. But Elena, what else have you picked up in the last couple of weeks of coaching and training?
Yeah, I mean, it's also been a busy week of coaching. The weekend after my race, so yeah, that following Friday, I was down in St. George, Utah for a half Ironman with 3 athletes, and that was super fun. I think one thing that we were talking about that went really well for all of them was we went through that mental plan, and then we went through creating a checklist also just to feel prepared for what we're doing that race week, and especially what we were doing that morning, because it's just, there's so much stuff to remember in terms of fueling and the logistics of getting to shuttles and all of that. And I think that ended up being, according to them, very helpful for just knowing that they could wake up and execute on that list and kind of have their brain just in a smooth spot going into the race. So that was great. And then one other insight I have gotten was actually from another friend who ran her first marathon at Sugarloaf. I guess that was last weekend. And I was just really amazed and impressed by her attitude going into it. She is a great athlete, but had never been a runner. I know her from playing hockey, so she's super strong, super fit, but wanted to take on a new challenge. And she had such a good mindset around curiosity in her approach to this marathon. She was really curious about how she would feel about running, about how mentally she would approach having a goal like this. She felt like it was very discreet in the sense that it's a time that people know what that means. And that was something that she was feeling anxiety around and was just curious about how she was dealing with that. And coming into the race, I think she was wanting to maybe be around sub 4. Like that was like a goal in her mind, but also was trying to let go of that goal and was feeling some conflict around how to approach the race when she had this goal, but also didn't want to have a goal and wanted to enjoy the experience. And when she went into the race, she was saying it was actually really emotional at the start line, because I realized in that moment that really what I was trying to figure out was if I could make it to the start line. The mountain I had to climb was the training and that 5-month block of running a lot. And that was really scary to me. And I showed myself that I could take on a new challenge and do that and get here and feel ready to do it. And that was really emotional. And I wasn't expecting that entirely. So that was one insight that I thought was interesting, was like recognizing what is the mountain that you're climbing and what does it mean? And I think she realized in the moment that it was just like getting there. And then the second thing was she was crushing her pacing and got to mile 21 and said it started feeling real and a little hard and had to grind out those miles 21 to 25, just getting to the end of the race. And when she got to 25, she realized that she didn't even care anymore about the time, because she had already shown herself that she could get to that new place that she hadn't been before, which was that long distance running, grinding mindset at that point. And she hadn't experienced that before. She talks about like a mental passport of traveling to a new place that you haven't been and seeing what it's like and stamping that place and getting back. And so she got to that point and crushed it, and then ended up finishing under 4 hours anyways. So it was kind of a win-win scenario, but it was just the journey of realizing in the moment, letting go of some of those expectations and goals, but still having an incredible experience and recognizing what matters to you. And just be curious, I think, when you're going into it, and try to really listen to your body and your emotions and your brain about what matters to you in those moments. I was really impressed by how she did that.
Wow. Well, congrats to all of your athletes. Like, it sounds like everyone had really, really awesome races. And I think what you said there really stands out to me in that, you know, we can have big goals going into races, but leaving some flexibility for those goals and even letting them evolve as the race plays out. I've certainly had experiences where I'm out there and it turns out that what I'm gunning for is I am in 4th place and I want to get to 3rd, or I'm in 2nd place and I want to get to 1st. But I went in thinking I had a time goal or something different. And so leaving space like that is exactly what this curious mindset is about. And sometimes you can surprise yourself with goals, coming true or being realized that are totally different from what you went into the race with. So I really like that idea. And I also have to ask you, how was St. George? Because I've raced the Ironman there and the conditions are absolutely brutal. I'm curious if it was a brutal race for your athletes and how that all shook out.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I think because everyone kept saying that the course was so brutal, they had expectations that it was just going to be the hardest thing ever. And then because their expectations were there, I think they ended up all surprising themselves with how much they enjoyed the bike ride. I mean, the run is brutal, I think, regardless, but at least you get the main climbing out of the way early. And so that you have a downhill section. So I think anytime there's climbing, I mean, unless it's a point-to-point race, there's also a bunch of descent. So I think they were really thriving off of some of the descent and then also just enjoying the scenery on the bike ride. It was definitely hot. I think that was the hardest thing. The run was by far the hardest section. It's the last, it's hilly, and it was hottest part of the day. So I think that was definitely still challenging, but everyone had said the bike course is so hard. And I think all of my athletes really enjoyed the bike course. So yeah, it was really good energy too. Just like a cool environment. The swim section is just, to me, a really beautiful place to swim and was really smooth. And at least the athletes I was coaching, they had previously only raced one half Ironman, and it was in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and it was like 95 degrees and 99% humidity with storms coming in and out. And so compared to that, it was also just like a great new experience.
I guess it's all relative. I think of St. George as like the hardest course that ever could exist for any reason ever, but thunderstorms and 99% humidity also sounds pretty bad.
Yeah, so, exactly.
That's awesome. Well, congrats on the coaching front. It's been like a huge month for you, both from a training and a coaching perspective. So I'm hoping that the sleep kind of continues to trend in the right direction as the season continues.
Thank you. I hope so too. We're getting there. But I'm curious now to hear, you've also had a lot of big coaching recently. Can we talk about your insights from all of that?
Yes. Yeah. It's been a really busy time of both training and coaching for me, honestly, in the best way. I, as a lot of people know, had a ton of travel earlier this year. And finally, I've been a little bit more stable, like sleeping in the same bed most nights, which is really nice for me. And that's really conducive to showing up for all my training sessions and also feeling like I can be the best coach that I can be. So a couple of insights from that. I first wanted to talk about just a big training weekend that I did fairly recently. I had a big long ride. I was aiming for 4 to 5 hours on the bike, run off the bike, and then a hard tempo run the day after that. And I picked up a lot of insights when I was thinking about absolutely nothing for like my 10 hours of training over the course of a weekend. And I think the first one, we come back to fueling all the time. We're always talking about fueling. But a big observation I had was that fueling really well during your big workouts on the weekend, it's great for feeling good during the workout, but it's also really good for just speeding up how fast you're going to recover and how great you feel for the rest of the day. So I've certainly had experiences where like maybe I scraped by with the fueling and got through the workout. But if I was depleted, I would just feel so bad for the whole afternoon. I'd be on the couch. I didn't have any energy. And this time I was like, you will be taking in 80 to 90 grams of carbs per hour on the bike. And I finished and I was like, that was a really solid workout and it didn't feel that bad. And I was able to have just a really nice day the rest of the day. So if you are the type of person who has to get your training in and then has to show up for other stuff in the day, maybe you've got kids that you have to shuttle around, maybe you're going out to dinner, whatever it is, I think fueling really well during that can be like a nice motivation for just having a great rest of the day. And especially for these back-to-back big efforts. I know you talked about, Elena, in your build doing like a 6-hour time on feet day and then a 21-mile run the next day. Fueling really well during that 6-hour time on feet is the best way to show up for that next day run. So all that is to say, fuel really well. It's not just good for the workout. It's also really good for the next day and the rest of that day.
Totally. I think that's a great reminder because I also feel that too. If I don't do that, well, one makes, like to your point, you had a great rest of the day after your workout. Like it's nice to have other things that you can do and have energy to go do those things and not just be just trying to hit your workout. So part of that's just like enjoying your life a bit. And then also, of course, makes a huge difference for recovery. So yeah, thanks for sharing because I think that is massive. And glad you were able to hit such great workouts and feel good.
It's like a confidence booster. Although to build on that insight, I would say a couple things that went into this weekend that I was a little worried about was I have not done like a 4 to 5 hour ride by myself yet too many times in this training cycle. I've had a couple here and there. But I was feeling kind of nervous about it just because it's a really daunting distance. And I was trying to think, okay, what can I do to make this go by faster? And I've actually had athletes ask me this a lot of times, like, how do you make really, really long stuff go by faster? What do you think about? What do you do? And I think this is actually similar, again, to something that you've said before about never telling yourself, like, I have 4.5 hours left at minute 5 or something, but instead thinking about how you can chunk up your day into a lot more manageable segments. So I decided for this particular route that I was going to do, I have a standard 28-mile bike loop that I do all the time. I can do it, in about 90 minutes as a recovery ride. And I was like, actually, I'm going to just do this loop 3 times because it feels really familiar. And I would stop back at the house in between each segment, refill my bottles, stretch for like a minute, and then go back out again. And then it was just like, oh, I just have 1.5 loops left, or I have 1 loop left, instead of saying I have what became an 87-mile ride. And that really did help. So if you are worried about like, oh, it feels really hard to ride out for 40 miles and turn around and ride back, then think about ways that you can chunk it up. I feel like you can probably do that with runs too, and it can be really helpful.
Totally. Yeah, breaking it up is just so helpful. I do that also on like laps on mountains if I'm just trying to get vert. I was like, okay, I'll do 2 or 3 laps on this, and it just is like, well, I'm only going to the top 1 time and come back. And then you're like, okay, do it again. But you're tricking yourself thinking that it's only the next one. So
I love that. And then one more thing I'll add to that is, again, I was a little bit nervous about this ride. I went in with kind of a bad headspace, I think. I was just dreading what it was going to be like. And then I ended up really surprising myself. So again, going in with some type of curiosity mindset and telling yourself like, hey, this might be bad, but it might also be a lot better than you're telling yourself, I think is really powerful. So I'm going to try to keep doing that with a lot of my upcoming big rides. Like, you never really know what it's going to bring. Maybe you go in with an awesome headspace and it ends up going relatively poorly. That's happened to me too. But staying curious, I think, is really important.
Love that. Yeah, definitely stay curious. What about race season now? What are you seeing from the athletes that are racing now?
Yeah, so to transition to coaching insights, I have one particular story about an athlete who we have actually interviewed on the podcast, Gina, and I wanted to tell a story about her recent trail race. So Gina is awesome. If you have not listened to her interview, definitely go check it out. But she trained really hard for the Vermont Overland Trail Race. It's a 15-mile trail race in Vermont. Tends to be a pretty muddy and technical course. But anyway, she was so ready for this race, and I was super jazzed for her. And then when she was heading out the door to get to this race, she ended up grabbing the wrong bag. And so she had no fuel, no electrolytes. She didn't have any of the products that she had intended to bring with her. And I think she had this moment standing, getting ready to start when she realized that she didn't have her stuff. Like, is it even worth it to go out and race? Because I don't have everything that I've practiced with. How am I going to follow my nutrition strategy? All of that. And she got over that. She went out and she actually had a phenomenal day. She ended up relying on what was at the aid stations. It was brand new products that she'd never tried before, but she just tried to approximate what we had targeted for like electrolyte targets and carb targets, and absolutely crushed it. And it's funny because her workout uploaded to Training Peaks before I heard her race recap. And I looked at the stats and I was like, oh my gosh, she blew this out of the water. And then I got the text saying like, I didn't have any of my stuff. And things seemed to be going completely sour right before I started. So just wanted to say here, a lesson from Gina's race is that your fitness and your attitude are the 2 most powerful things you can bring to race day. Everything else is details. Like, you do need to fuel, but it doesn't have to be the perfect fuel that you practice with. And there's always ways to just reset and get out there. So if anything goes wrong on race morning, it's okay. You have your fitness and you have your attitude, and nobody can take that away from you because it's not a tangible piece of gear or anything. So just super proud of Gina, and it was a really proud day for me to be a coach.
Oh, that's so awesome. Gina's awesome. So big congrats. And also I love that your fitness and your attitudes are intangibles. So just don't let yourself spiral if things aren't going your way.
Totally. Okay, my last insight. I know we've spent a long time on insights today, so maybe we'll get some of this stuff out. But I think this is related to, Elena and I actually had a very extended series called Female Athlete Stories that we launched in February and March, where we were talking about lots of different forces that, disproportionately affect female athletes. And I had an experience recently that I do think speaks to this whole thing. So I wanted to bring it up here. I was on a different bike ride a couple weeks ago. I was out there for, again, probably 4 or 5 hours. I'm riding along, tough ride. I was kind of in the pain cave. And I came up, I saw 2 riders in the distance ahead of me. They were both male riders. They just seemed to be kind of hanging out. They were riding side by side on a road that didn't have much of a shoulder. And so I was drilling and I thought, okay, I'm going to go around and pass them. I passed them. I gave them a little wave. I had my AirPods in. I wasn't really there to have a conversation, but I kept going. And about 2 minutes later, they surged forward from a downhill and came up right next to me, got in front of me and got next to me and basically blocked me from moving forward. and just started saying all these things. They're like, oh, the least you could do is say good morning and give us a smile, honey, all this stuff. And I think this just speaks to the idea that this happens a lot. There's a lot of unsolicited comments that come from men directed at female athletes on rides. I think there was probably some type of, ego bruise for the fact that I'd passed them. But this type of thing has happened to me a lot of times before. And I just want to put it out there that it's really not okay and happens a lot. And so ultimately, I swerved around and drilled it to get away from them. But that's something that you shouldn't have to do. And I was kind of freaked out for the rest of the day. And my heart rate was all amped. So it's just not a great situation. And I want to put it out there because this speaks to exactly what we've been talking about. If you're out there, don't talk to people who clearly don't want to talk to you, and think about if you're a guy, would you say something like that to another male athlete? Maybe, maybe not, but just want to put it out there.
Oh man, I'm sorry that happened to you. That is kind of a quintessential story of these, I guess, what we might call minor interactions that are frustrating, but like you said, it distracts you the rest of the day. You're thinking about it. You're not feeling safe out there. Yeah, I'm sorry. That sucks.
Yeah. And again, not even necessarily looking for sympathy on this. We're just here for some level of awareness. So people, please don't do this type of thing. It's not super safe.
Yeah.
But it's all good. Still had a good ride and had a nice run off the bike. So salvaged it a little bit.
So you still crushed the workout.
I mean, this was single-handedly responsible for raising the power that I put out in the last hour of the ride. So silver linings.
Definitely a silver lining. Well, thanks for sharing that. I know that's tough.
Of course. Well, I think with that, we've had a lot of insights. I think we are ready to transition to a really awesome interview that we have with Susan Dunklee, who is a former Olympic biathlete, an incredible coach. So I am going to transition us over there. But before I do that, I just wanted to give a quick plug. Actually, this is the first time that we've done this on the podcast, but a friend of ours has been really instrumental in organizing this event called Bike MS Cape Cod Getaway. It's a 2-day event at the end of June, so June 29th to 30th. And it's a huge fundraiser for MS. So there's options for riding, I believe, 75 and 100 miles on Saturday and 75 miles on Sunday. It's all supported. It's a total party. And again, it's a really awesome fundraiser for multiple sclerosis. So if you're interested in registering, check out bike-ms-.org, and I will link that in the show notes so people can check it out. But really, really great cause, and would love to be able to support this organization.
Awesome. Yeah, love some party charity rides.
The best. Awesome. All right. Without further ado, let's transition to our interview with Susan Dunklee.
So I'm very excited today to introduce our guest, the wonderful Susan Dunklee. She's a Vermont native. Susan competed for years traveling around the world as an elite biathlete before retiring in 2022 and starting work near her hometown in Craftsbury at the Outdoor Center there. So that's how I got to know her, through the Craftsbury Outdoor Center, which is an incredible program that hopefully we can talk a little bit more about. But as an Olympian, she's obviously an incredible athlete. She also works really hard to support other athletes and connect sport to higher purposes like community and environmental protection. And she's just an amazing person. So we're really excited to be able to speak with her today. Susan, welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Really excited to have you. We typically start by just getting your story. Could you share in your own words your background, how you got into sport, how you got going? Just start it.
Yeah. So I grew up in northeastern Vermont, and my family was a cross-country ski family. My father had competed for the national team in cross-country skiing. My parents met at University of Vermont on the ski team. And from a young age, I think I must have been skiing around the time I could first walk. And yeah, it was just kind of what we did as a family. I ski raced all throughout grade school, high school, college. I was also a runner when I was much younger. I'd almost say running was more my sport in high school than skiing was. I loved the team. I had a really good group of friends, a fun coach. And I went to college, and I was trying to decide whether I wanted to ski or run in college. And I don't know, I wasn't quite ready to give up skiing. I had some running scholarship offers, but I ended up going to Dartmouth because it was a place where I could try to do both. Dartmouth has an incredible outing club, and that's where I really found my people there. And the ski team is part of the outing club. And I think while I was there, the skiing piece became a little bit more my thing, I think, than the running. I loved the long trail runs, especially out in the mountains. We do these, what we call odd ventures, OD workouts, where you're just trying to get 3 hours or more of level 1 workout. And we'd be out on the Appalachian Trail or some other mountains in the area. And that was just just a lot of fun. And then in the winter, we'd travel together as a team, and there's always a lot of fun stuff going on. So when I graduated from college, I had the opportunity to join the U.S. biathlon team. They were looking to recruit skiers who were doing pretty well at the NCAA level, and they said they would teach them how to shoot. So I applied for that program. They had really good funding at the time. It was possible to get housing and basically room and board at the training center in Lake Placid, coaching. If I qualified for any trips, they could cover it. And there were very few ski clubs in the country at the time who could offer that sort of support. And so although I'd never done biathlon before and I had to learn the shooting piece, I don't know, I thought that would be kind of interesting. I wasn't really sure if I'd like to be an athlete full time. I'd always had a lot of interest in college. I liked being part of different clubs. Like I said, the outing club, which was like trail work and hiking and doing stuff like that, was always fun. I think my dad really was a mentor to me, and he gave me some good advice when I was making a decision of whether or not I'd pursue sport full time or not. He said, you know what, Susan, if you don't try this, you're always going to wonder what if. And he was absolutely right. So I moved to Lake Placid and started my career as a biathlete. And I spent a couple years there, learned the basics, and then I moved back to my home community over near Craftsbury, Vermont, to train for biathlon here and really see the biathlon program develop over my years here. And it's been really fun. And so then I spent the next 14 years with a national biathlon team and mostly competing at Craftsbury too, which was cool.
I love that story. It's so great to hear kind of how you got into it. And actually, I might back you up just a little bit because our audience is primarily, I would say, we've got a lot of triathletes, we've got some runners. And could you just give us a quick primer on what biathlon is for people who might not necessarily know? And we want to be clear that it's not duathlon, which a lot of triathletes are very familiar with. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I run into a normal person on the street of Boston or Chicago or something and I tell them I'm a biathlete, they're like, oh yeah, that's like swimming and running, right? And I'm like, no. So biathlon is this really exciting sport. It combines two completely different disciplines, cross-country skiing and rifle marksmanship. So when you're cross-country skiing, your heart rate's going, 3 beats a second. You're breathing really hard. You might even be seeing spots if you're pushing yourself super hard. And then you come into the shooting range mid-race and you have to calm yourself down. You have to take some deep breaths. You have to really focus on the process of shooting and not be competing for time when you're on the shooting mat. And it's almost Zen-like. And you shoot at 5 little black dots. They're pretty small. If you hit them, they turn white. If you miss them, they stay black and you have to do an extra penalty loop. And you go back out on the race course and you're fighting for every second on skis. And that's the nature of biathlon, is that you're switching between these two extremes of pushing yourself at an endurance level and really calming yourself down and staying focused and detached to shoot well.
It's such a fascinating sport. And I will say I got to watch some of the World Cup in Utah recently, and it was super cool to watch, mainly because you can see how hard people are pushing. I've also tried, but was lucky enough to be taught by Susan to try to shoot. And we just had to run one lap around and come back and try to shoot. And we even had blocks to hold the gun steady. And it was so hard. So I'm very impressed by it. And I'm curious too, Susan, like you mentioned growing up, running, kind of exploring, doing multiple sports, and then biathlon naturally has this element of these two very different components. Just curious how you think about mixing up training, or as a hyper-focused athlete, what does it feel like to be doing a couple different things versus doing one specific motion over and over again, that being the focus of your training?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a person where balance has been a huge part of who I am and what I value. And like I said, I was worried about becoming a full-time athlete because I was worried I wouldn't have balance in my life. I think elite athletes can put too much stock into the results sheet and have their whole identity wrapped up in one thing. And that's a really dangerous place to be. And so for me, having some sort of balance just in my bigger life was important. Having community, having a place where I belong that was bigger than just sport is always important. But then within the sport itself, I mean, I guess I've had lots of different ways of managing balance because, in biathlon, you're managing the stress of skiing really hard and the need to be calm when you come into the shooting range. You're managing different types of training. Some of it is running for hours out in the mountains or roller skiing. Some of it's just really focused shooting work in the range. Yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of different places where you need to balance and stay focused in the sport.
Yeah, and on the community side, or just the life balance that you were discussing, when you did commit, you said there's hesitations on committing to being an elite athlete. When you did commit to being an elite athlete, did you find that challenging actually? Was it a concern, or was it something that was okay given the baseline that you were trying to approach it with?
I struggled the first couple of years, and part of that is because at the training center in Lake Placid, where I was based and living full-time those first couple of years, it was hard to find other outlets, and you'd walk down the hall of the training center and there'd be Olympics posters everywhere. I know they've put up a countdown timer to the next Olympics into the sports med room. And so it's just like everything's focused on that. But when I moved back home towards the Craftsbury area, Craftsbury is a place, it's a nonprofit sports center, and it really focuses on having a balanced approach, having athletes who are pursuing the highest level of their sport, but also giving back to the community and trying to be involved, and also having outlets for people who don't want to be at elite level for sport, but they can also try the sport and get into it. And we have a bunch of kids programs and master's programs and whatnot. So,
and on that, I would love to actually hear you talk a little bit more about kind of your relationship to Craftsbury over the years, and also just, training in the Dartmouth environment, being in Lake Placid. I think you've probably been all over the world to train and compete, but at least our experience is that some of the best training in the world is here in the Northeast. And I think it's kind of a secret. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how that evolved over the course of your life as an athlete.
Yeah. I grew up skiing at the Outdoor Center in Craftsbury. When I was small, it was more of a mom and pop sort of operation. There were lots of little trails. They were narrow. They were, they could be rough in places. And as I've grown, the place has changed ownership. It's gotten more professional. It holds national level races. The trails have gotten wide. They've got homologated so they can host these big events. And it's been cool to see the evolution of the sport evolve and the landscape evolve to be able to support that high level and still not lose sight of having, community programs, kids programs, all this other stuff happening here. But yeah, I've always thought Vermont is one of the best places for ski training. We don't have like the crazy high mountains like you might get in the Rockies, but we have big enough mountains, and they're gnarly, they're tough, they're rocky. The weather can be challenging sometimes, but honestly, like racing in Europe, half the time the weather would be kind of crappy. And a lot of times you see athletes who, when the weather gets crappy, that they have a hard time focusing and wanting to push themselves as hard or even deal with that. And I always found it a comparative advantage to have grown up in a place where I was dealing with that sort of stuff on a regular basis, and I just knew that was my competitive advantage. And so when the conditions got tough, that was when I really thrived.
Yeah, the New England toughness. Susan, I remember you telling me a story too of your dad just dropping you off like 20 miles away from home and saying, figure out how to get home. And that was your adventure training. Yeah,
that was a fun one. This was when I had first decided I was going to move to Lake Placid. And so I was home for a few days before that happened. And my dad's like, you got to get some practice and train. And so he drove me before work to a couple towns over, dropped me off with a dog and a map, some snacks and some water, and said, I'll see you home at dinner time. And to get home, there was a trail, but it was basically went up and over like 6 different mountains. And then I had to bushwhack the last 3/4 of a mile with a compass. So that was fun.
I like how you describe that, and like we agree that those kind of adventures are really fun. What do you think about that framing where people are like, this sounds really challenging? What makes that kind of stuff fun to you? Why do you find that kind of adventure rewarding?
Yeah, I've always thrived on challenge. Challenge is what drives me, I think. And that's part of the reason why I love biathlon, because I think it is one of the most challenging sports. It's very frustrating. You fail more often than you succeed. But when you have to fail a lot to succeed, those times that you do succeed, it's just so much more rewarding. And I think that's what I love about challenge. I think if you're in a situation where you're always acing something, you just lose interest in it. And so I'm always seeking out challenge and surrounding myself with people who I know can challenge me, but will also support me when I get frustrated a little bit too.
Are there also, coming from the way you've handled this as an athlete through the years, are there habits or practices that you still use in your day-to-day life that you found really helpful for you improving as an athlete or just balancing yourself through the years?
Yeah. I think there's different pieces of mindset ideas that I really have latched onto as an athlete. One of them is to be very process-oriented, I think, and I'm always trying to encourage the kids that I'm coaching now at Craftsbury to not get too attached to a result sheet, not get too attached to how they shoot in a particular session, but rather approach it with a sense of curiosity and openness, and always approaching whatever you're doing with a learning mindset. It's like, what did I try to achieve today, and did I actually achieve it? And if not, it's like, what did I learn, and how can I use it going forward? And always keeping that as the purpose rather than trying to, win something or succeed. And I think we have a culture where we're way too afraid of failure. And I think if we can free ourselves from that fear of failure, we open ourselves up to be able to grow so much more.
I love that. And I think maybe if we think about your career as an athlete a little bit, I'm sure you probably have experienced a lot of success and a lot of failure at the same time. Could you kind of talk us through what those highs and lows have looked like? So if you were to kind of reflect back on all this time, what moments stand out to you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my biggest highs for sure were World Championships races. I had two different occasions in my career. I got a silver medal at World Championships, which was huge. We'd never had an American woman individually get a medal before. And so I'm really proud of those races. Biathlon is a very difficult sport to have a perfect race. There are so many things that have to go into it. You have to have a perfect shooting day where you hit all your targets. You have to have a perfect skiing day where you feel like you pace it just right. Your shape, your fitness is peaked. Your ski technicians who are taking care of your skis nail the wax just right. Your coach makes the right plan and the days leading up to it to get you prepared. You're in the right mental state. It's an incredible amount of pieces that have to come together. And it's a culmination of a lot of work with your staff, with your teammates over the years of training. And as, like I said before, biathlon teaches you how to fail and get used to failing. And every time you miss a target, that's a little miniature failure, right? And in a typical race, I think my shooting averages, over the course of a season were 70%. So I usually would miss targets in a race. But at World Championships in 2017, I hit 20 for 20, which is the only time I've hit 20 out of 20 in a 20-shot race. And I don't know, I felt in this flow state. Athletes talk about this flow state where you're not thinking too much about what's going on. You're just kind of reacting, and it just feels very controlled and calm, and you feel like you belong, and you're not fazed by anything. And yeah, I had that experience that day, and it was incredible. That was really special. I don't think it's normal to be able to find the flow state every race. I think as an athlete, you have to learn how to operate even when that's not there, and operate well and have good results. But that day was just magical. And then a few years later, I had another race. I was having a rough season. It was, I don't know, I think my peak ski speed probably happened maybe 2016, 2017. And then I kept racing until 2022, and my ski speed was just going downhill. I think internationally, the level's gotten higher. I was getting older, and staying focused, even when you've been at the really top level before and you want to be there again and you're not quite there anymore, it can be a little bit frustrating. But I popped one really good result at a World Championships in 2020. And that was unexpected. And that was really satisfying and fun because I was such an underdog there. So yeah, I don't know, there's times when it's challenging. But yeah, figuring out when to call it when you've been at a high level and you can't maintain that anymore is an interesting question. It's like, how much motivation do you still have to keep going?
Yeah, I'm actually really interested to dig more on that, because not only are you maybe dealing with this from like a physical perspective as you're aging, but it's also your identity for so long. How did you think about that decision to retire? And what was that journey like for you?
Yeah, I spent 4 years, I'd say, from maybe spring of 2018 to 2022, kind of on the fence about when to call it. And each year in April, when our season would be done, I'd spend 3 weeks or so thinking about whether to do another year or not. But it is tough. I think most athletes who did it as long as I did, I see them retire and then they are totally lost. They don't have a purpose. It takes them a year or 2 or 3 to kind of like find themselves again and get back on track, because you've given everything in your life to the sport. Every decision you've made has been with one purpose in mind. And I think what's really smart is if you can do some career development in parallel to your sporting career, if you can. Get a degree, get a certification for a job you want to do a part-time job if you can in the field that you're interested in, and just kind of have a plan and have some ideas coming out of it. So then you don't feel quite so lost when you're done. But it is a big change.
And I mean, I know you started working with Craftsbury. Could you talk about maybe why you decided that was the right place for you to go, and still how that transition kind of felt as you were moving into a very different phase of work and life?
Yeah. Well, the one thing that has anchored me all these years is a sense of place. I think some people are anchored by, what they do, or they're anchored by other people in their life. And for many, many years, my anchor was home. And for me, home is Craftsbury. I grew up in this area. I bought a house here about 8 years ago and absolutely love it here. I know my neighbors really well. I don't know, I don't want to move anywhere else. And so to me, I was like, I want to find a way to stay in town here, and I'll find a job to make that work. And the job is less important than the community piece. So that's what really lifted me when I was making that big life change.
And could we talk a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like now? So you're coaching at Craftsbury. Are you still training a little bit? Is it more for fun?
Yeah. So I coach bunch of different levels. So I was working with the running programs for a while, and I was coaching running camps, which there were high school groups, there were adult groups. I was working with this elite group, the Green Racing Project, and helping direct that program. And then I wanted to switch back into biathlon. So about, 6 months ago or so, I made that switch. And now I've been coaching biathlon programs. I'll be coaching biathlon camps this summer. I work with kids groups. I work with adults sometimes. It's like, again, it's supporting all different levels. A little bit of supporting with the Green Racing Project Biathletes, which is our elite biathlon team. But yeah, a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, and you mentioned before too, and this was like a small piece, but you had said like there's so much that goes into the race day. Like your coaches are dialed, your wax techs are dialed. It's more of a team thing. I'm super curious to hear how you have now approached that from the other side as a coach. Like you were an elite athlete for so long, and now you're a coach, and not just a coach for like a specific group. You're a coach for all these different levels. Like how does that feel, and what is the same from being an athlete, and what are you having to learn new from the other side as a coach?
Yeah, that's a good question. This year I've been exploring a little bit the different aspects of the sport beyond just the athlete's perspective. So I've spent a little time coaching. I've spent a little time officiating at races. I've spent a little time being a race director. And it is interesting, the best athletes often don't make the best coaches. I think that's a misconception that's out there. Just because you're fast and you know how to push yourself doesn't necessarily mean you know how to guide people and teach people. And coaching is really about being able to turn off your own ego and your own interest and really being able to see the people that you're working with and see what they need and do what you need to do to make them have a good experience and make them grow. And so it's been a little bit of learning about that. And this winter, I spent a couple weeks coaching in Italy with the American team. It's like the tier below the World Cup. It's called the IBU Cup. And it was fascinating for me to do that and to have that experience. But what was a big eye opener was just how much time went into all the race prep for those athletes. We'd leave the hotel at 5 a.m. to prep skis, and we'd be there straight through, 3 or 4 p.m., often not having time for dinner because we had multiple races happening and we had multiple groups and lots of, hundreds of skis to test and ski in. And yeah, it's just kind of nuts.
Yeah, it sounds very busy. And from that coaching perspective, what are some of the ways that you help athletes hone that race experience that you were mentioning of like, how do you get people in the right headspace? Because I find that as we're both coaches, like that is something that I've been having a lot of conversations with my athletes about of that mental approach. And some of it takes experience of just knowing yourself, but it can be really hard to get people to be in the right headspace going into a race because everyone wants to be like, they want to be their best. So they're taking it very intensely. And I would just love to hear how you balance that with both younger athletes and the elite athletes who are having to learn this for sustainability in sport.
Yeah, no, that's the biggest piece of like what makes an athlete be able to stick with it over time is how well they deal with that pressure and whether it can get to them personally or if they figure out a healthy way to manage it. And I think cultivating a sense of curiosity about the race experience and about the training creates a space between the result and the athlete. And I think that's just really important because that space helps the athlete realize this is not me, this is what I do, but it's not 100% of who I am. And just always framing it like, what did you learn? How are you going to use it going forward? And not just making this is the be all end all of everything. It's such a huge part of it.
So as a coach, just not being as results focused anyways, and just really encouraging that joy in the process.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I dig in a little bit on thinking about biathlon itself? I think it's so fascinating that you really need to know how to get to the shooting range or whatever, and then be able to calm yourself down. It reminds me a lot of, we have athletes who will go into triathlons, for example, and it's really easy to get super panicked in a swim or something just because everything's thrashing around and going on. I'm wondering if you could talk us a little bit through the mental or physical strategies that you use in the context of that type of racing, because I think it maybe is applicable across sports, but so on a big stage, the idea of actually being able to go from threshold skiing into being very calm and focused.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I often worked with keywords. I think that if you're in the middle of anytime, it doesn't matter if it's a race situation or not, honestly, it's like your brain only has the capacity to focus on one thing at a time. So I would find keywords that I knew worked really well for me, and I could hear that one keyword and it meant, even though it's just one thing, it could get out a lot of different things that I needed to be doing at that moment. And so with shooting, as I'd approach a shooting range, one keyword I really like to work with was open. And you start the approach as you're coming in about 200 meters or so before the range. You want to back off just a few percentage points of effort because otherwise you come in a little too hot and you're breathing so hard you can't settle. So you got to start backing off there. And then as I'm coming in around the corner by point 30, which is the end of the range, I think open. And open to me means like opening my senses. I'm looking around, I'm seeing what the wind flags are doing because the wind flags affect how I'm going to shoot. I'm looking for the open mats, the open points, basically. I'm looking for the open targets to make sure I'm lining up on a target that's open and not closed. Opening my airways, because breathing is such an important thing in biathlon. So remembering to breathe is a really centering, grounding thing that actually helps a lot with the coordination of the shooting and all this other stuff. And it's just kind of opening my mind and settling. And then I would switch from, once I kind of got into that mind space where I was just open and relaxed. And open is also that idea of curiosity too, right? Where you're more interested in just, you're detachedly looking at yourself rather than stuck in the moment. I'd switch from that keyword to another keyword as I got close to my shooting mat. I'd switch to set. And set would be setting my feet up. It would be setting my elbow up, right? It'd be getting the rifle loaded and set. And then the bolt, sound of the bolt closing, which is the last thing you do kind of before you're settling on the target. That sounds like the word set. And I'd be settling onto the target. And then I'd switch to like a still, breathe, still. So that's like settling down onto the target. And you're just working with keywords would really simplify each phase of tasks that needed to get done. And it took me a few years to kind of figure out what keywords work well for me, but I worked with a sports psychologist for a while. And I'd list like all the different tasks that would need to get done in a certain phase of time as I'm coming into the shooting range, for example. And the list would be, it'd be like, 30 items long when you think about all the little details. But then I'd clump them and I'd think about, okay, this first clump, like what word kind of gets at all those ideas? And that's when I came up with the word open. And so just playing around with stuff like that is super, super important. And then you just have to do replications of it. You practice it 10,000 times until it becomes very smooth. But yeah.
I love that. And I think I could very easily see how that could apply to other sports too. If you're in that open water swim, finding a word that is reminding you just like stroke or something, or like sighting, there's a lot of different things you could incorporate there. So, but biathlon is probably the best example.
It's interesting because like you can't always control you can never control what thoughts pop into your head, right? You have a thought and it just occurs to you, and you can't beat yourself up over the fact that you have this thought that's unhelpful or whatnot. I'll be on the shooting mat. I'll be halfway through my stage. We shoot 5 targets and I'm on target 4 or something. And suddenly I have this thought pop into my head. And it's like, man, if I hit this last 2 targets, I could be on the podium today. And that's a horribly unhelpful thought to have, because it's taking your focus off the process of what you're doing, and you're focused on the result. And then when you're not focused on the process, you're probably not going to be executing the shot the way you want, with a good trigger squeeze, good follow through, all that sort of stuff. And it's very distracting. But instead of beating yourself up, you have to just get this mindful state where like you recognize that there's a distracting thought, and then you have to have a plan for how you're going to refocus. It's like, okay, trigger pressure. And then you're back to where you need to be. Boom. And so it's like you have a plan for what keyword or what thoughts you want to have, but you also have to have a plan for how you're going to react when you get yourself distracted or something freaks you out or whatever happens in a race. And just how are you going to get yourself back on track?
I love that. And I think it just speaks to the idea of practice, right? Like probably you're practicing these words every time you go out, which is so powerful.
Yeah, that really resonates. And it reminds me, I was just having a conversation with a friend recently who was training for her first marathon. And she was, trying not to have expectations around this because she's trying to focus on the process, but she's a very competitive person. And she's like, I'm now at this point again where training's been going real well, but my expectations are coming back in. And it reminds me so much of what you're saying of like, you can't judge yourself for having those thoughts. They come in. But then it's just really priming yourself on how to then like recenter yourself on what actually matters. And like that's a natural process. It's so cool to hear you speak about it because it just sounds like such a mindful experience. Like mindfulness is so tied to biathlon specifically, but I think that extrapolates to life and other sports as well. So
yeah, it's really wild because I had never shot a rifle until I was 22 years old when I was graduating college, and I joined the biathlon team over in Lake Placid. But I'd grown up around deer hunters. So a lot of my aunts, uncles and stuff were into that. But to me, I had this connotation of rifles being a very violent thing and a very, I don't know, it was a little scary. I remember shooting my biathlon rifle for the first time, noticing the smell of gunpowder and thinking, this doesn't belong with endurance sport. This is weird. But honestly, shooting training is one of the most centering things. It's spending an hour at the range and shooting, you have to be so mindful. You have to learn to kind of detach yourself from your emotions. You have to be very focused. You have to not want to hit the target too badly. Otherwise, you are absolutely going to miss it. It's like always recognizing those distracting thoughts, bringing it back to center, bringing it back to like trigger squeeze. And you just finish the training session at the end of the day and you just feel really calm and just really relaxed and just really, centered. It is mindfulness and motion. It's cool.
Very cool. In that mindfulness practice, it sounds like when you were competing a lot and training a lot, obviously you're getting that from just practicing in the range all the time. Do you still do that for yourself when you go to the range, or do you do other things? Like, how do you think about mindfulness now?
Yeah, I don't do it as actively now as I did. I did shoot like maybe 3 or 4 times last year, and I always was like, man, I miss this. This feels good. But yeah, I try to get out running or biking or something or skiing like 3 or 4 times a week at least now, but I'm not nearly as active as I was. I'm over 2 years out now, and I'm still settling into like post-athlete life and what that looks like.
And you maybe speak a little bit more about that, and like when you're going out for these activities, it's like purely fun-based, or are you trying to have any goals or not have goals? And that's part of the point. Like, how do you actually frame that transition? Because I know it can be really challenging when you were competing so intensely too. Now I'm figuring out what sport looks like for me and how I move my body in a way that feels good.
Yeah, no, and I think the way that feels good is key in figuring out what does feel motivating. Because I think I pushed the training a few years beyond what I had 100% motivation for. So now when I try to go out, I don't always feel very motivated. And that's kind of sad because I want to be a lifelong athlete. So I've been trying to do stuff with friends more often. I've been signing up for some strength classes where there's a class and I know there's going to be people there. So it's an accountability. I have to show up. And honestly, I hated life in the gym when I was an athlete, but now going to CrossFit classes is one of my favorite things, which is hilarious. One of the biggest things I got into in the past couple of years is orienteering. So I do try to go to a few orienteering races every summer, and it's like a new sport that I'm not great at. And it's really fun to be on the steep part of the learning curve again for something. So yeah, that's cool.
That's awesome. Orienteering sounds really cool. Like there was like those 24-hour adventure races I just learned about. I have to try one of them. Where you're figuring out where to go. It's like the mental component tied with like the physical adventure. It seems like a really cool fit for you too. So.
Yeah, I'd love to try one of those long ones sometime. It'd be cool.
Yeah. Just like more holistically, I know you're at Craftsbury, you're transitioning into biathlon and coaching, and Craftsbury also, like you said, really focuses on community and really focuses on environmental stewardship. Just curious how you think about your goals now or your purpose, because I know you mentioned that when athletes retire, it's really hard to see them without purpose. Like, how did you reframe that for yourself in this next chapter?
Yeah, I think your purpose becomes helping other people, and when you can make that shift, it's a different way of being involved in sport, which is a really fulfilling way of being involved in sport in some ways. Right now, I'm finding that this winter I worked a ton with kids, and I think like 15-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and seeing sport through their eyes has been really, really inspiring and fun. And I think that's been cool. Like you said, Craftsbury has a big emphasis on kind of environmentalism and sustainability, and that's always been a really interesting piece. I think as a winter sport athlete, we traveled to a lot of places where we were skiing on man-made snow only, on a ribbon of snow in the Alps in the middle of January. And skiing and snow sports are the canary in the coal mine for global warming. And it's a little discouraging to be in a sport where you see that so clearly. But Craftsbury has a mission of trying to do the little things that we can in our community to be more green and to be more sustainable. And so getting involved in some of the things at the Outdoor Center has been really good for that. Trying to work with groups that come through and just think about, what do we use do we want to give t-shirts out at camps anymore? Like, I don't, because I feel like t-shirts are something that sits in people's closet when you have an event t-shirt, whereas what do people actually need? So I made the shift with camps when I was doing running camps to give people socks instead, because I think they're more likely to be worn out item. But I don't know. I spent a little time trying to do some advocacy work on the sustainability front as an athlete. And one of the things I think that athletes can really contribute there is the fact that this is a really challenging situation that we're facing. And I think athletes, more than anybody else, are used to dealing with challenging situations. Even when they seem hopeless, we know how to keep fighting and keep pushing and keep striving for something. We celebrate underdogs in sport, and we are underdogs in climate stuff. So being able to think about that stuff is really important, and being able to think about it in a way that you don't lose hope and just give it up because it seems so daunting. And I think athletes are the ones who are most poised to be able to deliver that message.
Yeah. The parallels between athleticism and the lessons you learn mentally to big challenges is, I think, a huge part of why the endurance communities can do so much, because you've learned just how to keep pushing. So appreciate that perspective.
Definitely. Transitioning now to our closing questions that we always end with. We were wondering what you're excited for in 2024. So you're going to be coaching a lot. It sounds like you're running some camps, maybe doing some CrossFit, other things. What would you say you're excited about?
Right now, I'm most excited about my garden. I love taking at least like 20 minutes, half an hour every day in the summer and spending time in the dirt. I got about 20 to 30 different types of vegetables that'll get going. They're all on my kitchen counter right now as little indoor baby plants. And yeah, it's going to be great.
That's awesome. And I love how you can tap into all these different hobbies at the same time. Like, I think this speaks to the point of being well-rounded. It's like gardening is always there. It doesn't matter if you're an elite athlete or not. So that's probably something we imagine you'll do for a while.
Yeah. And once you're not an elite athlete anymore, you have a lot more time to devote to it too, which is great.
Definitely. And then our last question is, do you have any favorite books or podcasts that you can recommend for our listeners?
Oh, man. Well, it's not really on the sporting genre. I love to read a lot. I read a lot of books. Most recently, I've read Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead, which is a pretty intense book. And it talks a lot about the opioid epidemic in America and how that got started. So it's a really heavy, heavy subject matter, but it's really well written. And then I just read this book, a Vermont book by a really local author here called Gather by Kenneth Cano, which has a lot of really parallel themes and plot points to Barbara Kingsolver's book. So those were books I both enjoyed. Enjoyed it is maybe not the right word for them because they're so heavy in terms of subject matter, but they're really well done.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Susan, for chatting and just sharing your story and wisdom. I really think there's a lot that will resonate with people. So we just really appreciate having you and hope that the gardening goes very well and you have a great 2024 as the spring weather starts picking up in Vermont.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.